America was built by immigrants, but not all of them arrived with empty hands. Some brought traditions, some brought culture, and some brought power. This is how the Mafia crossed the ocean. By the late 1800s, Sicily was drowning in poverty. The dream of a unified Italy had become a nightmare for many in the south. The land was concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy barons, leaving millions of peasants with nothing. Jobs were scarce, and the government in Rome seemed distant and indifferent. In this vacuum of state power, violence was a common language. Local strongmen, the seeds of what would become the Mafia, offered a brutal form of justice and protection for a price. For the average Sicilian, life was a daily struggle for survival. The promise of America, a land of opportunity, work, and freedom, was more than a dream, it was a lifeline. Letters from relatives who had already made the journey spoke of paid labor, of food on the table, of a life free from the suffocating grip of the old landlords. So, between 1880 and 1920, millions of Italians, the vast majority from the impoverished South, made the gut-wrenching decision to leave everything they had ever known behind. They packed what little they owned into a single suitcase and gambled their futures on a one-way ticket across the Atlantic. The journey to America was an ordeal in itself. Immigrants were crammed into the steerage sections of massive steamships, often in dark, unsanitary, and overcrowded conditions. The voyage could take weeks, and disease spread quickly. For many, the first sight of the Statue of Liberty was a moment of overwhelming emotion, a symbol that they had survived the passage and reached the promised land. But their trials were far from over. Docking in New York, they were processed through Ellis Island, a daunting bureaucratic maze for people who spoke little to no English. Doctors checked them for diseases, and inspectors with clipboards decided their fate with a series of rapid-fire questions. Many were given anglicized names they didn't recognize. Once through the gates, they were met with a new kind of hostility. They were seen as outsiders, mistrusted for their language, their Catholic faith, and their close-knit family ties. Landlords and employers often exploited them, paying them less than other workers and forcing them into squalid tenements. In this alien and often hostile environment, they turned to the only thing they trusted: their own community. They settled in neighborhoods that became known as Little Italies, creating a familiar world in a foreign land. The Mafia didn't arrive as an army, marching off the ships with guns in hand. It arrived quietly, person by person, family by family. It wasn't an organization that immigrated. It was a mindset, a method of survival and power that had been perfected in the hills of Sicily. Men who had been part of these power structures back home saw the same conditions in America that allowed them to thrive in Sicily: a vulnerable population, a mistrust of official authority, and a need for order. They started small. They offered help to bewildered newcomers, finding them jobs on the docks or construction sites, securing them housing in crowded tenements, and acting as informal bankers. Most importantly, they offered a familiar form of justice. If a shopkeeper was being harassed, or a worker was cheated out of his wages, he wouldn't go to the American police, who didn't speak his language and likely didn't care. He'd go to the local man of respect. These men would settle disputes, enforce contracts, and provide protection. In return, they asked for loyalty and a small tribute, a fee for their services. Slowly but surely, this system of grassroots power began to solidify. The protectors were becoming rulers. They were controlling entire neighborhoods. The Mafia's influence wasn't spread evenly. It took root and flourished in specific cities where the conditions were right. First, New York, as the main port of entry. It had the largest Italian immigrant population in the country. In the crowded streets of Lower Manhattan and East Harlem, countless small gangs and mutual aid societies competed for influence. Over time, these groups began to consolidate their power. Alliances were forged, territories were drawn, and powerful families emerged. These early power struggles and alliances laid the groundwork for what would later become the infamous Five Families, the commission that would dominate organized crime in America for decades. Next, Chicago. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Chicago was a booming industrial city, a magnet for immigrant labor. It was also a city drowning in corruption. Politicians, police, and judges were often for sale. This anything-goes environment was the perfect incubator for the Mafia. Sicilian gangs found it easy to operate, paying off the right people to look the other way as they built their rackets in gambling, extortion, and labor control. The city's corrupt soul made it fertile ground for the empire that would one day be run by Al Capone. And finally, a city often forgotten in the Mafia story, but one of the most important, New Orleans. Thanks to its bustling port and direct trade routes with Sicily, New Orleans saw one of the earliest waves of Italian immigration. It also became one of the Mafia's first American footholds. As early as the 1880s, Sicilian factions were battling for control of the city's docks and produce markets. In 1890, the city's police chief was assassinated, an event that led to the largest mass lynching in American history, targeting Italian immigrants. While tragic, the incident revealed just how entrenched and powerful these secret societies had already become, long before the Mafia became a household name in New York or Chicago. At first, the services provided by these men of respect were a genuine benefit to the community. They were protectors and mediators in a world that offered immigrants neither protection nor mediation. They were a necessary response to prejudice and neglect. But as their power grew, the dynamic shifted. Protection began to look a lot like control. Assistance turned into extortion. The pizzo, the tribute paid for protection, was no longer a voluntary offering of respect. It became a mandatory tax. Businesses that refused to pay found their windows smashed, their deliveries stolen, or their shops burned to the ground. Fear replaced trust. The very community the Mafia claimed to protect became its first victim. The methods of the old world had not just survived the journey across the ocean. They had been supercharged by the opportunities of the new world. The Mafia had transformed from a Sicilian secret society into a budding American empire. The Mafia found opportunity in America, but one event would make them rich and powerful beyond their wildest imagination. In the next episode, the government would make a fateful decision. Alcohol would be banned, and crime would explode. Join us for episode 4. Prohibition, the Mafia's Golden Age. This is episode 3 of the Mafia History series. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's next.